Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're going to recap this week in cannabis from March 22nd to the 28th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, all I ask is that you leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. And then, of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and then there's plenty of content that you can go back, rewatch, and use to get caught up to speed. Now, what we wanted out of the New York State Senate did come, though, and a final bill has been introduced to legalize tax and regulate adult use cannabis into the Senate, and the vote is expected next week. Now, just to remind you that New York's budget deadline is April 1st, which is Thursday of this coming week, so expect the vote to come before end of day Wednesday, hopefully before then so I can cover it in my Wednesday midweek update. But nonetheless, as of yesterday, Saturday, today bill language was introduced in the legislature reflecting the three-way agreement to legalize tax and regulate adult use cannabis. The bill, an amended version of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, is carried in the Assembly by Majority Leader Crystal Stokes and is expected to be voted on next week. And just to point out, when this bill becomes law, New York will be poised to implement a nation-leading model for what cannabis legalization can look like. And just to remind you, this is New York City, folks. New York State, the Big Apple, one of the biggest markets in the U.S. and one of the epicenters of culture. So as New York shifts its sentiment towards cannabis, I think it will help a lot of people and the plant in general as well. And what's great is just the final legislation is the culmination of a years-long efforts by Senator Kruger, Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Stokes, and countless advocates. So thank you to you individuals for putting in this work over time, fighting against the grain and making this work. Now, the provisions included are down here, and also the goals of the bill are listed here. I'm not going to go through them all, but if you're interested, make sure that you grab the link below and check them out. But nonetheless, this is what we were waiting on next week. It took until Saturday to come, but this is the next big catalyst we were waiting on. So that's great. And on top of New York, Mexican Senate will pass cannabis legalization bill as revised by deputies, top lawmaker says. Now, the last deadline we had from Mexico was April 1st, and it appears that they're extending this to April 30th, but with some positive elements on top of that. So the Mexican Senate is prepared to approve a bill to legalize cannabis as amended by the Chambers of Deputies earlier this month, a key senator said this week. So due to the urgency of meeting a Supreme Court deadline to enact the policy change by April 30th, so apparently Mexico has to do this by April 30th, Senator Eduardo Ramirez Aguilar of the ruling Morena Party said that at this time it is important to legislate in the terms that are presented to us. So basically what that means is lawmakers can consider further revisions to the cannabis laws after the initial bill is enacted, he said, but we just need to pass it as is because the Supreme Court wants this done. We got to do it. Our priority is that the legislation comes into force, and the only way to get that done is by accepting it as is. So this is really big out of Mexico. Look out for that to be passed before April 30th, but this is fantastic. So not only New York, not only Mexico, an entire country, but France, a second entire influential country, launches their 2-year experiment with medical cannabis with a view to eventual legalization. So this is great. The French project was approved by Parliament in 2019, but delayed because of the coronavirus pandemic. So nice to see that this is able to commence finally, and the goal is to gather data about the effectiveness and safety of therapeutic cannabis and to prepare eventual logistic circuits for future distribution, the ministry said. So this is great for Europe, especially eventual legal adult use legalization, not just medical, but some 3,000 patients around the country will be given medical cannabis treatments. And I do know that Tilfria and Aurora Cannabis are two of the companies that were chosen to supply this experiment. Now, they're not getting paid to do it. They're doing it for free, but hopefully that will give them, an entry point with their medical and adult use cannabis in the future. But so in regards of sentiment, this is fantastic, despite the share prices not doing what we want them to do. In the long run, after the run-up we've seen over this last year, we needed to see some healthy consolidation in order to continue running up going forward. Now, Profit Trends brought out this article, and I found some infographics that are worth sharing. The American cannabis companies see more revenue than Canadian LPs. I've been saying this all along, but now the facts are set in stone, and the MSOs are light years ahead of the Canadian LPs, revenue-wise and business-wise, which is just sort of a fact to point out. So if you're looking at companies that you want to invest in, this is why I've just been repeating the top 4 of the biggest ones, because they have the largest revenue for dried cannabis flower by themselves. Just to point out, Canopy is the largest Canadian LP, and behind them we have APHA. But APHA is selling so much less flower because a lot of their distribution actually comes from their German distribution company, CC Pharma, that they own. And although they have the #1 market share in Ontario, they are not leading in like cannabis revenue, right? Dry flower revenue. It's their total revenue that makes them a big player eventually long term, especially that German distribution network they have in Germany for eventual like operations there. But in what we can see with revenue numbers, these are the top ones, these MSOs, and then behind them we have Columbia Care, Harvest Health and Recreation, Air Wellness, TerraAscend, Ianthus, Tilt Holdings, Tilray, and MedMen Enterprises. So, of course, if you want to look at which companies are going to perform the best, you want to make sure these companies are also cutting their operational costs, so they're spending less, they're growing their gross profit margins, but ultimately that their revenues are growing in the right direction. And so that's interesting to point out. You can see it all right there. And in young, rapidly growing markets like cannabis, investors tend to pay a nice premium for shares. This is what's funny, is because people are paying a premium to buy Canadian LPs right now and own them, because what they're paying for is future growth, not necessarily current revenue. And the only reason that Canadian LPs are providing this future growth is because they trade on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, right? They have exposure to US capital, whereas these US MSOs don't. They trade on the OTC and the CSE, but they won't be there forever. Keep that in mind. They're only there for now, as cannabis is still ignored by some of these bigger investors. But the main thing is that these MSOs are trading based on their current revenue, and there's no future growth baked into their prices. So that is why they're still trading at such a discount right now. And with that in mind, when we look at cannabis companies listed above and their current price to sales ratios, we see an interesting trend. Now, I would put an X through MedMen or Ianthus, because the reason their price to sales is so low is also because they're terribly managed companies and they just dilute shareholders. So you do not want to consider either of those two. But going from down here, Tilt, Aurora Cannabis, and this is again investing in Aurora now based on their market cap and future revenue projections. Not like getting into Aurora in 2018 when they were valued at $15 billion and you would just never want to look at Aurora again if that's when you had originally invested in them. But going through the list, Harvest Health, Air Wellness, Cresco Labs, these are basically where it ends, companies with a price to sales of less than 10. And just to point out price to sales ratio, price refers to your market capitalization, or the total value of a company at a given time, the market cap, and then divided by the annual sales or revenue for a given year. Not earnings or profit, but for sales and revenue. And so let's just, for an example, if a company makes $100 million in revenue in a single year and their market cap is only $500 million, they're a very cheap company because they're only trading at a price to sales ratio of 5. Right? 100 million in revenue, but a total value of 500 million. And so this is why I actually have a heavy position in Harvest Health and Recreation, especially. I think they will be a sleeper in Arizona. And I've also invested in Tilt because they're just trading at such a discount to what their future values will be. So it's basically like free money. And then, so yeah, what we can tell though is that when you're looking at a company and you're evaluating them, you want to make sure that they have high revenues, and the potential for growth, and you also want to make sure that their price to sales ratio is as little as possible. They're as undervalued as possible. The lower your price to sales, the more undervalued you are. And essentially, this is why I chose Cresco Labs out of the other 3 big MSOs as well. Most importantly is because when I started buying, again, Cresco Labs was at the lowest price to sales ratio, which meant they had the lowest market cap based on the potential future revenue. But then as you can see, if you go down the list, Canopy Growth is just way off the list, trading at a 30 price to sales. But get this, Canopy has the highest price to sales ratio by a wide margin, though this is far below the 100 plus price to sales ratio we saw for shares of Canopy in 2018. Like, what? But many, like Columbia Care and Green Thumb, trade in roughly the same range. APHA is at the midpoint, and there is some value in terms of not only majors like Cresco, but also MSOs like Air Wellness, Harvest Health and Recreation, and I would not count MedMen. They're probably getting paid to add their name in here. The U.S. cannabis industry is likely to see a major change this year, and we can already see changes taking place around the world. Revenue is surging for the sector, particularly in American MSOs. But the upside here is that we're not seeing the manic sky-high valuations of 2017 and 2018 that we saw even in MSOs and Canadian LPs. Because, and what that tells us though is that there are bargains to be had. This makes the cannabis sector to be embraced. And again, folks, I would just try to focus your attention. This is the best deal. Like, there's the most value in these companies that are increasing their revenues and are trading at the lowest price to sales, just because, again, at their current price, they represent a discount. That's essentially it. So hopefully you understood that. If you have any questions about this explanation, folks, please let me know and I'll try to answer them. But now on to Cresco Labs CEO Charles Bachtell recapping what they recently did in their quarter.
Talking about what you saw in the quarter as we've seen continued demand across the sector.
Zach, thanks for having me. It's good to be back. We were happy to be able to report these Q4 results today. It's a good story to tell. 2020 was an incredibly strong year for us, over 270% growth year over year. We've truly established ourselves as the largest wholesaler of branded cannabis products in the industry. It was also nice. BDS Analytics, which is an analytics company that covers the space, identifying Cresco as the #1 selling brand of cannabis in the country. So a lot of positives. happy to meet and beat expectations, and it's a good place to start.
Right. And I just want to point out that, as you can see, their share price has fallen. Is this a bad thing? No, because you don't invest based on the share price today. You invest based on the company's underlying operations, the growth that they're seeing, their competitive advantage, and Cresco, all of the MSOs has shown us that. So look, if you invested a while back, especially last year, and you've seen the shares fall back, this consolidation is healthy and it's actually needed in order for the industry to continue running throughout the rest of the year. So be patient. If you have cash, try to buy more. If you don't, just know that you are invested in a good company. So don't worry about the share price. It really doesn't matter. Much like the analogy I mentioned last episode, what's more important is knowing that you're invested in a good company, because in the short term, the market is a voting machine, but in the long term, it is a weighing machine. And if you're invested in the right companies, you will be rewarded. And so if we jump ahead to, I think it was 458, they talk about SAFE. Yeah, so reintroducing SAFing. They cover New York, but we've pretty much covered
New York,
that.
Perhaps legalizing, but federally, we once again saw the Safe Banking Act introduced. That would change the banking laws around companies like yours to access capital and change the laws on that side. We've seen that before as well. Hasn't gone much of anywhere in getting passed outside of the House. Talk to me about how that might change things as well, because I'm sure you'd take either one at this point. But how would it change maybe how you guys operate as a company in putting some of your capital to work?
It's a great question, and we're optimistic that we're going to get both. So it's really a potential great story here that'll develop in the next few weeks.
And what he says both is New York and then safe banking.
But safe, for sure, it has implications for organizations like ours. Cost of capital, access to capital, cost of capital have always been really big issues that this industry has had to deal with. And you're talking about the fastest growing industry in America. Over $17.5 billion worth of sales last year. 300,000+ individuals are actually employed in the space, and we're doing it with one hand tied behind our back. We don't have access to traditional banking opportunities. So for us, it'll bring down cost of capital, which is a big unlock. It'll allow us to invest more in infrastructure and, again, keep the industry developing the way it is. I think it's also very important to note it's an incredible unlock for the future development of the broader industry too. As this industry is developing on a state-by-state basis, inclusivity and diversity is a big part of where the adult use side of this industry is going, and access to capital for those smaller startups is going to be a gating issue for them to get into the space.
And when he mentions smaller startups, I would imagine just storefronts. They're not cultivators, they're simply distributors. So once the legal market becomes bigger and regulations relax, which will take time, but this will come. And then once safe banking passes, it will be easier for anyone, especially people from underprivileged communities as well, but like literally I just mean anyone, to get a loan, open up a storefront, and then buy wholesale cannabis and sell it at a markup. Like that is going to be a big opportunity for people.
So access to small business loans, that seed capital to actually open more doors. Not only is it a requirement for those new entrants, it's also an unlock for a company like Cresco that is wholesale focused and sees that as potential new partners that we'll be able to sell into.
So that is another reason why I reiterate Cresco's approach, as opposed to the other three big MSOs going with a larger footprint. Cresco has gone with less dispensaries and focusing on that wholesale. So that's just one thing in the long run that you can potentially look forward to. But him bringing that up is a very valid point. And just to reiterate, this whole interview, he talks about, obviously you can grab the link below to watch it, but he talks about how good their earnings were, with New York coming online, that they're already in there, and then the safe banking. And you can just tell this is a funny place to pause it, but he seems pretty relaxed for a CEO and is confident that this is going to happen this year. So moving over, Green Thumb Industries to open Rise Lake in the Hills in Illinois, the 55th store in the nation. So 55th store in the country. I'm not sure if this is their 10th in Illinois. I think I missed over this when I was reading through it initially, but cannabis sales in Illinois totaled more than $1 billion in 2020 following the legalization of adult use at the beginning of that same year. So keep in mind that all of these companies that are in Illinois, like Green Thumb, Cresco Labs, and Curaleaf, are going to be continuously earning a good portion of this revenue as the state sales continue to rise, and the state of Illinois did collect $175 million in tax revenue from cannabis sales in 2020 and is on pace for over $350 million in 2021 based on January and February tax receipts. So the growth is not slowing down anytime, folks. Another state that reported Michigan cannabis sales increased 160% to $105 million in February of 2021. So this is 160% from February of 2020. Now, we did see February just have a small decrease from January, due to 3 fewer days in this month. But the main thing is that the Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency breaks out sales of medical and adult use, with medical sales improving 48% from a year ago to 38.1 million, and adult use sales soaring 353% to 67.1 million. So folks, we're getting into those industries, especially getting into those industries early that are just legalizing with enough population to drive sales. That is huge. Now, on the other side of that, we do still have a few prohibitionists out there that sadly exist, but I figure I should give them a little bit of attention before I crush them. Marijuana foes seek to impose THC potency caps to curb industry's growth. Now, this is just such a silly thing. Imagine that alcohol prohibition ended, and you get to go to the store and buy your first 6-pack of beer that you've bought in a very long time, and then on your way out, a politician goes, "Thanks for voting. Now I want to take my 3 beer as my cut." It's like, no! And the fact that these, prohibitionists don't even want to acknowledge the fact that there's no evidence or data that proves that THC is dangerous to the human body, it's just silly. But just wanting to point out that industry insiders suggest such moves could mean a return to prohibition, since many of the proposals would cap THC beneath what's currently available in many state legal markets, and banning those products, industry proponents warn, would create a new illicit market for higher potency cannabis and spawn more underground competition for legal cannabis companies. This in turn would restart the war on drugs. So I just wanted to point this out. It's just like, how stupid is this? And for whoever wants this to happen, it's just like, if we go down this road, we start banning certain products, we get law enforcement back into the business of enforcing cannabis laws. It's terrible policy, and it's heading down the wrong path. So whoever these folks are, Senator John Cornyn and Dianne Feinstein, you guys are terrible people, because you're just trying to control things that you have no right to try to control. And so just wanting to point that out, that the nice thing is that these are the minority now, and we're getting past this. Also, actually wanted to add this point that it seems as if these are probably the last few pockets that Big Pharma, can get into, that they think they have an ability to slow down the growth of cannabis. Because what's funny is that the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry have joined forces with cannabis. They're in mature industries, and I'm sure they've realized that, we're going to lose a lot of our profits over time, especially to the wellness cannabis provides, so why not try to join in with them if we can, versus Big Pharma that's like, no, we desperately cannot have cannabis revolutionize the medical industry, right? So obviously there are reasons behind this, and I do think it's mostly just it's the last bit of defiance that we're seeing, and on top of that, we do have a study proving that there's no evidence that medical cannabis access laws encourage youth cannabis use. Now, we've covered this in Canada, but Normal is happy to announce that this data, basically, if you want to find the study, it's at this link, PubMed here, but a team of investigators affiliated with Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, as well as with Harvard University and the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, reviewed cannabis use trends in more than 1 million adolescents grades 9 to 12 in over a 25-year period. Consistent with prior studies, authors concluded that the study found no evidence between 1991 and 2015 of increases in adolescents reporting past 30-day cannabis use or heavy marijuana use associated with the state medical cannabis law enactment or operational medical cannabis law dispensaries. Now, author added, our main findings was that adolescents residing in states with dispensaries with legal medical cannabis had significantly lower odds of past 30-day use compared to adolescents in states without medical legal cannabis. So you actually have more youth using cannabis in states that don't legalize at all. That is what the data shows. So my God, it's just great that this is getting published and being put out there, especially at this time when we need it the most. But, more evidence that proves that past propaganda is wrong is good for us in the first place, and then once we can deschedule it, we can find more positive evidence for the therapeutic benefits. One step at a time, folks. Now, going on to some developments in legislation and with SAFE, Tom Engel here reports that the House Cannabis Banking Bill just got 15 new co-sponsors for a total of 124 so far. So basically that means this is going through the House, easy. They need 100 votes, they've got 124. Boom, SAFE is going to pass the House. Now, an update, Senator Hicks Democratic just became the latest co-sponsor of the Senate cannabis banking bill. Now there are 32 senators assigned altogether. That's great to see. Obviously, we hope that more signers will come on over time, but just wanted to point out that this should be smooth sailing through the House then, and they are making progress with SAFE in the Senate so far. Obviously, it needs 60 votes to pass, but this is a start. So just wanted to point that out. Progress is slowly but surely being made. And Todd referenced some investment firms, references to New York and safe banking. So I wanted to cover these as well. So our call, this is from Craig Hallam Capital Group LLC, basically about New York cannabis legalization first glimpse. Conflicting retail reports spark caution. We remain bullish, especially on wholesale. So our call, yesterday afternoon, Bloomberg broke the news that New York legalization was a done deal, citing interviews with lawmakers. Now, we know that nothing had been introduced yet, but thanks to what we saw on Saturday, that is more likely to go through as it's been said that it will. Hazy wording around the medical and adult use retail outlook for existing license holders could add 4 additional sites and would be able to add 2 adult use dispensaries, sparked caution that existing medical dispensaries might not be able to co-locate or sell to adult use consumers. It also sparked caution that with 10 existing license holders, perhaps only 20 adult use stores would be open when the market kicks off. That's not enough stores at all. Hours later, however, MJ Biz Daily reported that existing license holders could operate 3 adult use stores, co-locating them with 3 of their medical marijuana dispensaries, and that as many as 900 retail stores, I like that, would be allowed. These early reports are conflicting, and rules won't be known with certainty when the bill is introduced. We expect in the coming days, happen on Saturday, but they continue bullish on New York. So that is great from Craig Hallam. And this is about SAFE with BTIG. So upon further review, another look at SAFE points to a potential cover for U.S. institutions' New York legislation imminent. So reiterating what we saw last week, despite, again, shares looking and going down, they look bad, but trust me, that's not what you want to judge your investments off of. What you should know. Last week, Republican Ed Perlmutter reintroduced the Safe Banking Act consistent with our expectations, and it's expected that the Senate was introduced the version of the bill on Tuesday, and that did happen. Good. While there was no explicit safe harbor language that would allow the U.S. MSOs or cannabis-related businesses in general to uplist to U.S. major exchanges or have access to U.S. capital markets, there was also no explicit language prohibiting it. In fact, there was a section in the bill that struck us as favorable enough that would allow for interpretation. If you know anything about law, as long as you can interpret it, then anything goes. So specifically, we refer to Section 2.A.5 that states federal banking regulators may not prohibit or penalize a depository institution or entity for performing a financial service for or in association with a depository institution, for or otherwise discourage a depository institution or entity performing a financial service for or in association with the depository institution from engaging in a financial service for a cannabis-related legitimate business or service provider. Now, that's very difficult, like lawyer jargon, but basically, it is this conflict that would need to be resolved, most likely in a change of language by FinCEN with regard to AML rules clearing banks from potential prosecution when dealing with cannabis-related businesses. In our view, this is the type of cover protection that exchanges, the larger financial institutions, would need to feel comfortable engaging the U.S. MSOs. And lastly, we point out that SAFE Act will likely undergo multiple revisions before the final bill is passed in both chambers, irrespective of when. And so this is the big thing. There's going to be multiple revisions. Things can be amended and added in along the way. So irrespective of when, each incremental step forward is a positive for the industry and should be viewed as such. In the meantime, we continue to focus on the progress made at the Senate level, which ultimately has the most impact on business fundamentals. To this point, we are encouraged that New York legislation is imminent. So I know that was very difficult to try to translate, so I found this other one that tries to explain that whole thing even better. And this is from Brady Cobb, who is a trained lawyer. So, to gain further clarity, we spoke with Brady Cobb, CEO of Bluma Wellness, who apprised us of interesting language that could trigger both uplisting and the tapping of U.S. capital markets. Were SAFE to be enacted into law in its current form, we believe that there would be an inherent conflict with the Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network, FinCEN, a bureau of the U.S. Treasury Department, because SAFE does nothing to deschedule cannabis from its Schedule 1 CSA classification. This would mean that under SAFE, depository institutions would be allowed to offer banking services to cannabis-related businesses, but at the same time would technically be committing a federal crime, money laundering, as per the anti-money laundering statutes, disallowing banks to engage with illegal enterprises, which cannabis operators are federally speaking. So basically, if you're a lawyer and you can interpret something, that is a big deal. And basically what this is just showing is that it's going to create further confusion. And what that will hopefully lead to is either changing the technicals under the AML, or changing the technicals either in the SAFE bill or with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, because it all has to gel, right? It all has to work together and not conflict. So it is this conflict that would need to get resolved, most likely in a change of language by FinCEN with regard to AML rules, clearing banks from potential prosecution when dealing with cannabis-related businesses. In our view, this is the type of cover protection that exchanges and larger financial institutions would need to feel comfortable engaging in the US MSOs. So again, lots is going to come. There's still lots of changes to be made, but I just wanted to try and translate this as best as I could, because folks, ultimately, although we're not seeing the prices or the share prices trend in the right direction yet, all of this is good, and the longer it takes, the greater this potential bull run can really be. So last few things to point out. Northam looks to move cannabis up marijuana legalization to July 1st. This is basically the case in Virginia, where they passed legislation, but it wouldn't take effect until 2024, which is really just passing legislation to get voted in. That has nothing to do with actually legalizing for your citizens and giving them the benefits of cannabis. But anyways, this is just something to add, that they are pushing to get this done by July 1st, so hopefully that would make Virginia the 17th official state, but things are moving quickly, folks, so there's a lot of positives on the ground. Do not forget what's actually on the ground, and hey, if you've got cash, buy more shares while they're still cheap. And lastly, here are the top 20 cannabis companies in the world ranked by fully diluted market cap. So stock_MJ Stock Trader, thank you again for being a gentleman and breaking this down for us. Now, he does have his own portal on here, so I recommend that you go follow and support him there. But basically breaking down the companies based on market cap. So these are the most expensive companies to the least expensive companies. Obviously, this is a mix of MSOs and LPs, but it's their market cap, so their total value, their recent quarter revenue, so numbers they just reported, their current annual revenue, so what their recent quarter projects for their next so it would be what their latest quarter revenue projects for the next 4 quarters, and then 2021 revenue estimates for the entire year, 2022 revenue estimates for the entire year. So just like they recently reported Q4 and full year earnings, these are the numbers that they're going to report at the end of 2021, at the end of 2022, and then these are their current price to sales ratio. Remember, their price, their market cap divided by their annual revenue. For right now, their current price to sales, their full 2021 price to sales based on the revenue that they're going to be making in 2021, and their full price to sales for 2022 based on the revenue numbers they're going to be making in 2022 based on their current market cap now. So again, folks, you want to look for companies that are trading at low price to sales multiples, but this is just a great shot. Thank you again for awesome people online that do this, share this, and make this public. So you can find more of that here. And lastly, I just wanted to bring out this interview, the cannabis trade with Jason Wild, who is the CEO of TerraAscend. It was a very eye-opening interview, and it walks through Jason Wild, who has experience investing in Canada, before the bubble, and now is focusing in the US. Basically just it helps give insight into someone that's been through the entire thing, and it's just very educational. I watched it, I enjoyed it, so I would recommend it to any of you that are interested. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I hope you enjoyed that and got some value out of it. I do apologize for some of the long legal jargon, especially in that last safe reading, but basically the whole idea is that all of this on the ground, everything in reality is positive towards cannabis. The sentiment is changing, so do not let that scare you so that you sell your share prices, or do not, let that worry you too much. Stay focused on what matters, which are the fundamentals, because we have a very positive year ahead of us for the cannabis industry. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or what you think might be the next catalyst. If you think New York is not going to pass, or you think it will, let me know why or why not. But I'm very confident that all of this is going to happen, because at the end of the day, cannabis legalization, or ending cannabis prohibition, is good for America. They need it, especially with jobs, the tax revenue, and all that. So thank you so much again, everyone. Subscribe if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I'll catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update and hopefully the official signature of New York. Have a great day, everybody.